This is very interesting. We're going to be talking about Australia, Queensland to be specific. And this was shared with me. A letter was sent out to the stakes there. It says, "Dear everyone with a current calling in the something first ward, I have recently been given the attached guide for working with children in Queensland. This has been compiled by church employees." And this is the important part. There have been some law changes that I have been informed came into effect yesterday. What are these new laws about? Protecting children. What does the LDS Church do when legally they are forced to enact and take steps to protect children? Well, they have to make sure everybody knows what's going on. So it says, although this document, and this is the document that the church prepared in response to these new legal protocols in Queensland, although this document is intended for use by leaders working directly with children, after reading it, I believe it is important for everyone with a calling to have access to the information. Good for this stake president, right? Everybody needs to read this. But as you'll see later, it's pretty comprehensive, the protocols that the country's putting in place, or Queensland. The attached documents can assist you to know what to do and what to be on the lookout for. It's a heavy topic, but let's work together to keep our kids safe. It always seems that in other countries, the pressure is on to do the right thing just because of laws that are enacted in the land. I'm thinking of the Brit Vengers, right, who brought attention to laws that have changed in the UK for background checks. So the next slide is, and this is the Brisbane Temple in Queensland. The next slide here, this is providing a safe church experience for children and youth. Again, this is a 42-page document that the LDS Church in that area put together to explain to people what their new responsibilities and role is in protecting children in the church. And the laws, they're kind of about institutionally protecting children. And it's very comprehensive. And this is the church's response, 42 pages. So it says, Queensland's Child Safeguarding Handbook, 42-page handbook, explains how church leaders, employees, and volunteers in Queensland, Australia must comply with the Australian child protection laws while serving in church callings involving children and youth. So I kind of just put together, with the help of AI, of course, a summary of what's in this document, because again, it's 42 pages. But there's some parts in here that I will say, I don't know how the church can continue business as usual when you see what some of these guidelines are. And you guys can freeze on these and you can read them. But number one, mandatory government background checks become a legal prerequisite. The handbook says no card, no start. Anybody that works with any kind of youth, anywhere, has any contact with youth is going to have a background check. It's going to have to receive a card that allows them to move forward in working with youth. So, that's something the church doesn't do unless there's a national law or something like this in place that says, hey, you got to do it. There are extensive reporting requirements now. The handbook repeatedly emphasizes that abuse allegations are not simply internal ecclesiastical matters. And this is true. The handbook does go through what the national document is saying: call police immediately, comply with mandatory reporting, cooperate with civil investigators, this kind of stuff. However, they also make this statement, again, in the church's document that says the obligation to report includes any information that may be disclosed in confidential conversation or religious confession, unless there is urgent safety concern for a child requiring reporting to the police before other notifications occur. Mission presidents, stake presidents, bishops, and branch presidents must, that's in capital letters, call the Priesthood Leaders Australia Child Protection Helpline phone. What do you guys think of that? Basically, this other document from Australia is saying, oh no, you got to report this. Don't just do it internally. You've got to report it. But here's this highlighted, I didn't do this. This is in the church's manual, just like that. Any thoughts about that before we move forward?
Yeah. The only thing I'm thinking is the church still seems to want you to call the helpline.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the country says you have to do this. Now, you can do both in a sense. You could call the police and report it, and you could call the helpline. But man, I think it's going to be better if law enforcement handles these instances than church lawyers, always.
Oh, Muted.
Yeah, thank you. It's obvious to me that what the law says is that if there is an urgent safety concern for a child, that you have to report immediately. I mean, right away, immediately, right?
Right.
And then if it's not urgent, then you still have to do it right away, but maybe not as right now as if there is a urgent safety concern. So what the church is saying is, if we don't have to report right away and pick up the phone, that's the first phone call we make, then definitely call the church, which is there to protect the church. That's all it is there for. And what this does, I think, is it gives away the game. If anybody ever wondered what the church cares about most, the kids or their own bottom line, their own reputation, their own good name, this gives it away in spades in my mind, because because they're only saying this. I mean, they're saying, if you have to follow the law, follow the law. But if you don't absolutely have to, call us first anyway. Why would they not have it be just fine to call the law first regardless? And saying call the law first regardless of whether the child has an urgent safety concern, because what they care about more than the kids is their bottom line. They admitted it.
No, I agree. And must is capitalized. You must call the church first. So this 42-page document, I believe, is how to still kind of wiggle around these new guidelines that have been put out from official sources. So let's go through a couple more. And again, this is a massive document. I'm just paraphrasing. Queensland new reportable conduct scheme. This is probably the newest legal development. Beginning on July 1st, Queensland requires organizations, including religious organizations, to report certain allegations involving workers and volunteers to the Queensland Family and Child Commission. The conduct does not have to occur during church activities. Okay, that's always been a big distinction. It didn't happen at church. This is saying anything that you become aware of, that you notice, that isn't at church, you're going to have to report that. It applies to clergy, employees, and volunteers with qualifying callings. So pretty much anybody that comes into contact with any children anywhere. Number 4, if you have a comment about any of these, stop me and make it. Religious confession does not exempt reporting. Okay. One of the most significant legal statements appears to be the reporting section. The handbook notes that Queensland law requires reporting, even if the information was learned in confidential conversations or religious confession. Okay. So again, trying to make this clear. I know we go round and round about this with the different laws in the US, but it looks like Queensland is just saying it doesn't matter how you hear about it, you have got to report. Hence that statement on the slide before. Now this one is the one that I think may change everything as far as the way the church does things. Much more detail, operational rules than the general handbook. Many policies, one for more prescriptive than members are accustomed to seeing. Examples include no adults changing clothes with youth. Okay. So if you go on a temple baptism trip, you can't go into a dressing room, I guess, and change clothes back and forth. I don't even know how that works anyway. No personal phone photography of children. 2 adults present during meetings and classes. Okay. Transportation rules, overnight sleeping arrangements, changing room etiquette, restroom supervision, online communications, expectations, social media moderation, record keeping requirements. Again, each of these is a massive section. But here is what is extremely interesting to me. This is number 8, explicit prohibition on one-on-one situations. All right. Although the church has increasingly encouraged the 2-deep leadership model, this handbook makes avoiding one-on-one interactions a formal safeguarding policy. It applies to teaching, interviews, transportation, overnight activities, virtual meetings, and other interactions. So I kind of went more into the body of what they're saying. So meetings, it says a meeting is a meeting, whether it is in person, virtual, or on the telephone. For virtual and in-person meetings, there should always be 2 adults who have working with children check-ins meeting for the entire length. So that means they have to have their card. They have to have gone through the training. It can't be a bishop's interview where you invite your mom in if she hasn't done the training. It has to be 2 adults that are certified by this new program that are in the interview with you. So that's kind of interesting, right? Because right now the policy is, we've always known that you can invite someone into the interview. No, we haven't always known that. Most of us, especially of my age, were put there alone in a room with a grown man, and we were asked things that were really inappropriate. Let's talk about that. The next section is inappropriate conversations. It says clear, direct, and age-appropriate language should always be used in interactions with the youth. In situations where negative language or tone is being used by a child, parent, or guardian or other person, the situation is to be addressed and is inappropriately reinforced. And it's inappropriateness reinforced. There's a whole list of how you should be talking to youth. I'm going to fast forward down here to F. And these are things that you cannot do. Under no circumstance is any form of inappropriate conversations to occur between, with, or in the presence of children or youth. And this includes, it goes through some different things, but F says, have inappropriate conversations or inquiries of a sexual nature. So what is a worthiness interview but an inquiry of a sexual nature? I know they've tried to soften these, but for those of us of a certain age, everything was a sexual question, a very specific question. What did you do? How long did you do it? Who was it with? How did you feel? Go through the mechanics with me.
By the way,
yes.
This is what Rasband and Oakes mean by religious freedom.
Yes.
Tampered with.
Yes.
Is that countries and societies and cultures are now catching up. This isn't the 1980s anymore. We recognize that abuse is prevalent. There's a lot more that we can do about it. And we're beginning to put an end to the spaces that used to be safe for unhealthy behavior by adults towards children. Again, that's just one category. And I think it's those kinds of things that the LDS Church and its leadership sees as the world infringing upon its rights. And so I just, again, they're getting it right here. There's no reason why stranger man should be having a question of a sexual nature with a child. That should have an end put to it. Other countries are doing that. Sooner or later, the United States will do things like this too. Where does the church go? It would be better off to get on the front end of this and say, we've received revelation and we need to be a healthier church and make these changes. But instead, they'll be dragged kicking and screaming, only doing it where they're required to.
Yeah, we have the right to ask sexual questions of children to determine their worthiness so that they can go to the temple. That's our right. That is religious freedom to the LDS Church. I love how you tied that together. Any thoughts on this, RFM? Then I have one more quick slide.
I think you're right, Bill. And Rebecca, religious freedom is making it open season on kids in the Mormon Church.
Yeah. No, everybody knows what I'm talking about of a certain age. Those interviews really did happen. Those questions really were asked. And, a lot of us try to kind of not think about it or suppress it, but it definitely informed how we grew up. And it's interesting because in this handbook, they don't really address this. I just kind of pulled these out, that were taken from the national guidelines. So I don't know what they're going to do about this, because to me, it's pretty clear. You have to have at least 2 people who are certified with this new program. And you cannot ask even innuendo of a sexual question, even saying, tell me about your worthiness or chastity. That is innuendo right there. And a lot of bishops dig in past that. Even if you do the bare minimum, that's still innuendo and you should be reported. Last 2 things in this huge document, required safeguarding training. And it's basically anybody that comes into any contact with the child. I think that's why they're giving this handbook to the entire ward, because even volunteer, if you substitute for a class, you're going to have had this training. And then the final one is greater emphasis on documentation, writing down everything that happens, reporting in a certain way. So again, it's a massive document. I'm sure someone will do an episode sometime on it, but it is fascinating to see how in other countries, they take this very seriously. The church kind of scrambles, puts out its own guidelines to have people sort of adhere, but also given ways that maybe they can sort of work around because it doesn't fit with what the church wants to do, especially this interviewing process. And so I made a short today that said, is this the end of bishop interviews, worthiness interviews in Australia? I don't think it is. But they're pretty clear that they're illegal is what they're saying. Doing that is illegal.
Yeah, and it should be.
So is this passed? By passed, I mean, the law has been passed. It's in force in Australia now.
Yeah, July 1st. And that's why this church's own document, 42 pages, is out there explaining the law and explaining how the members have to pivot. If we remember in the UK with the Brit Vengers, they brought to the church's attention, hey, everybody's got to have a background check, or they can come shut you down. I mean, that's simplistic, but you know what I'm saying? So the church did pivot there and had to adhere to the laws of the land. And so I think they're trying here with this document, but there's a lot to work out, because to me, it says pretty clearly, bishop cannot be alone and cannot even say, let's talk about your worthiness, or do you obey the law of chastity? Because that's sexual innuendo right there. And you're talking to an 11-year-old, a child. So it'll be interesting to watch.
Okay, very good. Thank you for that story, Rebecca. Next